A lot of people like to use, momentum or progress versus just busy motion. When's the last time someone on your team said they weren't busy? When's the last time someone didn't want to appear like they're getting stuff done? Everyone wants that appearance. And quite frankly, we all know some people can get things done in an hour. Another person, that same task or to do can take 3 hours. So we shouldn't be measuring in hours, we should be measuring in results.
Hi, I'm Chris Sugden, managing partner at Edison Partners and your host of Electrifying Growth. This is Sit Down with Sugden, where I share from my experiences as both the investor and an operator to help you get that next stage of growth.
As I think about starting off the year with our initial episode of Sit Down with Sugden, I think about, and this is not just last year, this is many years of experience. As board members, we get these recaps from our portfolio companies, and everything was great, but for some reason, the P&L didn't quite translate to actual numbers. And worse yet, we're on comp committees, so we want to pay bonuses because everything was great, but we missed our numbers. But we're talking about all the things we accomplished, but did it actually translate back to the so-called scoreboard, which is the P&L, if you're a business leader? And the P&L being both revenue, and I think we all have lived through the grow at all costs where revenue is all that matters. And we all know gross margin matters and net margin or EBITDA matters in this day and age. So in this, next few minutes of this episode, I'd like to talk to you about what I like to call, the paradigm of effort and measuring effort versus results and measuring results. And I'll talk a little bit about this from the context of, football, since we're kind of wrapping up an exciting both college and heading towards a Super Bowl season, from the idea that what statistics really matter. Is it the scoreboard or all the other statistics we measure at the end of the day on a football field? So for the next few minutes, let's talk about effort versus results and how to measure and get to better results at the end of the year. You'll know that I like sports analogies. If you haven't listened before and you don't like sports, there may be some analogies that either go over your head or you grow tired of. So I'll try and find some business analogies as well here. But if you think about sports and especially football, there's a great quote by a defensive coordinator of a team I follow that said, stats are for losers. And it's all about the scoreboard. How many times have you seen time of possession in a football game or most yards gained in a football game, but somehow the winning team actually has less time of possession or fewer yards? That's what I mean when I frame effort versus results in a business. And if you think about it, you all also may have just come out of your annual review season. If you're a leader, a manager of a company, a CEO, or you maybe just doing them now. And have you gotten someone else's self-assessment and it talked about all these things they did, and you're looking to see what are the points that actually ended up on the board? Quite frankly, in our business, I also like to say, in our business being the investing business, it's actually really easy to put money in the ground, as in go invest in a business. It's really hard to make that turn that money, that $1 into 3, 5, 10, $50, like as in 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x our returns. So exits are a lot of times what we think about as real results in the private equity or venture capital growth equity business. And in fact, if you're reading about our business, you'll hear a lot about, exit droughts and liquidity crunches and that sort of thing. So when you think about effort, I talked to 300 CEOs last year, entrepreneurs. I attended 25 board meetings or 50 board meetings. Okay, what came out of those board meetings that were actual results? If I think about effort, okay, you spoke to 300 or 400 or 500 CEOs last year as a young associate whose job is to talk to CEOs, to do business development. What actually happened through those 300 to 500 conversations? If I frame it in the life of a software company CEO, how many times have you heard, we booked X amount of business, but somehow we missed our revenue goal? Of course, how many times have you heard, step back in the funnel, I booked 100 visits with prospects and that particular individual closed 2 deals? Is 2% the right close rate? Effort, 100, 2% results. And I know it seems really trite and really simple, but I think we all can kind of relate to, again, someone who works for us that is framing it of the things they've done versus the things that have actually contributed to the company's success. So how does you as a leader, you as a CEO, you as an executive, management member of management, frame that for your team to know the difference? I think MBOs, managed by objective, That tends to be a buzzword or an acronym that gets a little overused. Are the objectives actually effort objectives or the results objectives? And actually, a lot of times we're the culprits, the leaders, the executives, the founders, the CEOs are the culprits of this problem because we haven't clearly defined what we think is important that are the results versus the effort. The momentum, the kind of moving down, running outside versus running on a treadmill and actually running somewhere versus running in place. So, not to mix metaphors, but I've given you a football metaphor for time of possession, but how many points do we put on the board? So I'll stick with that one versus the treadmill one, because in some ways, if we've got a fitness goal, the treadmill works just fine. We aren't getting anywhere. So the treadmill one or the Peloton one may be a bad example. But I'm going to come back to this football analogy, this time of possession analogy, because we all know at the end of the day, it's who wins on the scoreboard that matters. Just like in your business, if your revenue growth rate target was 40 or 50 or 60%, and you put up 20% growth for the year, but your sales team turns around and says, but we hit our bookings target. Well, something's off. Was bookings actually more a measure of effort versus the results of turning that bookings into revenue? Some business models are there's a bookings to revenue lag. Some businesses, a bookings becomes revenue day one. But I guess I'd say step back and think to yourself, if I'm talking to a sales team, much easier because we're trying to close contracts. But does every department in my organization know what the difference is between effort and results? And quite frankly, whether it be a finance and admin organization, whether it be a customer service organization, everyone can deliver results. But a lot of times, organizations that are unrelated to sales can look a lot like effort. And I do think about, is everyone contributing to the top line or at least a bigger bottom line? Whether that's an EBITDA percentage growing, 10% margin. Some people think of EBITDA margin. Some people think of 60, 70, 80, 90% gross margin. But if I'm in an admin team or a finance team or a support team, if I'm being more productive, I should be able to increase my net operating margin, my EBITDA margin. How can I do that? Can I get more results versus same amount of effort, more results? So if I think about customer service, is my call handling time going down? So therefore doing more with less versus I'm going to handle 1,000 calls. How fast am I going to handle the call so I can handle 1,000 calls with fewer people? And at the same time, have the customer satisfaction rate go up. I'm diving all the way to customer service because I think oftentimes we think about these as functions that are one, below the line, and two, less able to contribute to either the bottom line or the top line. They're just sort of, kind of cost of doing business. And I'd like you as CEOs, you as executive team members to think about framing every department and every individual as contributing to either revenue growth, contributing to gross margin percentage increasing. Can we take it up 10 basis points or better yet, 100 basis points, or said in English, 1% or 3% or 5%? We're 75% gross margin. How do we get to 80? We're a 10% EBITDA net margin business. How do we get to 12, 15, 20? Everyone in the organization can contribute to that, but they can't if they're measuring effort versus what's the result that's going to make that gross margin increase happen? What's going to make that net margin increase happen? So I give you an example of customer service. Again, we're going to handle 1,000 calls this year and our rating for those calls is going to be 8 out of 10, or our net promoter score is going to be 68 versus last year was 62, whatever your measure is. But is that actually getting to the result on the scoreboard of impacting the P&L? Number of calls I handle, net promoter score, or customer satisfaction, neither of those tell me I'm going to be more productive in my P&L. So what would I do? I'd combine number of calls we handle and call resolution and net promoter score with a call handling or productivity time in that customer service group. So reduce how long it takes to handle the call, have satisfaction go up. The debate about you can have it, fast and cheap, but you can have one or the other, but you can have both. We all know that's not true in the world of productivity and AI as well. Everything's getting both faster and cheaper, but you got to tie it back to a measurable P&L for every department is sort of the bottom line I'm trying to describe. We actually see this in our portfolio on occasion. You've got a business that rather than a pure SaaS software as a service business where a contract and we can go bill a full contract or bill a year or a quarter in advance and have that revenue happen on a booking. A lot of times there are businesses that have bookings that convert to revenue upon implementation, upon a go live, upon the customer doing something with their customers, because a lot of times companies are helping empower their customers. And we've had it on occasion where bookings is wildly successful, but somehow the revenue didn't translate. And a lot of times we realize that too late. So if you've got this sort of, wow, we grew bookings 50%, but revenue somehow grew 25% or 30%, there's clearly a disconnect there. And that's back to, is effort a booking? And as a result, revenue. You may have the luxury that the bookings turn into revenue, like I said, overnight, great. But if it doesn't, and you have a disconnect between your growth rate on your P&L and your growth rate on your sales team, that's back to, I'll call it an effort versus a result question that I think you should be asking yourself. So a lot of people like to use, momentum or progress versus just busy motion. I think using the term busy, when's the last time someone on your team said they weren't busy? When's the last time someone didn't want to appear like they're getting stuff done? Everyone wants that appearance. And quite frankly, we all know some people can get things done in an hour. Another person, that same task or to do can take 3 hours. So we shouldn't be measuring in hours, we should be measuring in results. So to sort of put a bow on it, take each department in your organization and look at whether it's management by objective or MBOs, whether it's your company goals. Are they all measuring something that's going to contribute back to your P&L? I know that sounds like a very, boy, that's just a ones and zeros kind of private equity statement. But at the end of the day, we all know if you're running a business, if you're not driving higher revenue growth and higher gross margin and or higher net margin, hopefully both, those are results that aren't translating from the effort your company's putting in. So take every department, ask yourself, is this at the end of the year, but again, at the end of each quarter, if I'm hitting these goals, is it going to translate back to the P&L? And that's how I would think about the difference between, are we measuring effort versus are we actually measuring and getting? At the end of the day, it's about getting, not just measuring the results we're looking for. Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again.